Hi, I'm Pat. Welcome back. This is the Jen Kingwell Golden Days quilt that I showed you on an earlier episode. On that episode, we made the backing, so be sure to check that out if you haven't seen it already. Now it's on the long arm frame, and it's here so I can thread baste it. That way it'll be ready for hand quilting. I really don't like pin basting, so I have it here on the long arm to do thread basting instead. After I'm done basting this quilt, I'm going to be hand quilting it. Right now I'm thinking it's going to be a big stitch style with pearl cotton. Just because I have a long arm doesn't mean I don't also enjoy hand quilting. It's a much slower process, it gives different results, and in fact for this quilt, with all the applique, the soft fabrics, and the overall softness of the hand-stitched pieces, I think the hand quilting is going to be a better finished result for this particular quilt. Right now, I'm actually ripping out all of the basting stitches that I've done so far, and I'm going to redo the whole thing. Stick around and I'll show you what went wrong and how I'm going to fix it. Anytime I'm using the long arm, the first step is always to load the backing fabric. So this loading method is one that I picked up from a Facebook group called VG Quilting. Valeria, who runs that group, has a great recommended loading method for the backing fabric, where you actually load it all the way onto the take-up bar first, and then you load it backwards onto the backing bar. This helps keep things really straight. It works great. I use all cotton batting all the time, and I like to buy it on a bulk roll, so then I can just cut off the amount that I need. I'm pressing the quilt top again because it's been folded up for a while. I want to make sure there aren't any wrinkles that I'm going to have to deal with on the frame. Like always, I'm positioning the quilt top on top of the batting and backing with a couple inches of the backing to spare along the top edge, just to leave a little room. It turns out this time that's actually going to be the wrong choice, and I'll explain more about that later on. Here you can see that I'm rolling the quilt top onto the top bar. You don't really have to do this. You can float the top, which means just let it hang over the edge, and that works fine. But it can be nice sometimes to roll the top onto the bar just to keep it off the floor and out of the way. Since I'm basting, I could use just about any pattern, and it doesn't need to be digitized. However, I'm going to take a shortcut here, and I'm using a digitized 4-inch grid pattern that I picked up from the same Facebook group that I mentioned earlier. I'm calling this a shortcut because I can be hands-off while the machine stitches a large section of the basted area. If you're doing this with a Bernina like me, you're going to set the stitch length on the sew head before you start sewing, not on the computer. I decided to use 2 stitches per inch here. I want to show you what the sewing path looks like in this digitized design. It has 3 horizontal rows where it alternates direction, and then it does the vertical rows also alternating direction, working from right to left. It doesn't need much attention from me along the way. I just need to make sure the foot doesn't get caught on the upper edge of the quilt top, and then also just to make sure nothing gets bunched up. Here's the actual speed of the machine shown in real time. So here's where I discovered a problem. It turns out there's a seam in the backing fabric that is directly beneath the bottom edge of the quilt top. I can't leave it there because it's going to emphasize any lack of squareness in the overall quilt. So it turns out this was a mistake on my part, and next I'm going to explain to you how this happened. Based on my quilt size, the backing needs to be 96 inches square. So what I did was take 3 pieces 96 inches wide by the width of fabric and attach them together. So that gave me a finished backing that was 96 by about 126, so it's oversized in one direction. When I loaded the quilt top, I left a little buffer at the top like I always do, but that put the bottom edge of the quilt aligned directly with that seam. To avoid this, I could have repositioned the top further down on the backing to center those seams in the quilt. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rip out all the basting I've done so far, reposition the top, and then rebaste it. Ripping all this out and redoing it is going to add several hours of time. However, when I thought about the amount of time I've spent on this quilt top already, especially with the applique and hand piecing, and the amount of time I'm going to spend hand quilting it, I decided it was worth it. I'm not going to have all the basting ripped out and redone today to show you, so do follow me on Instagram and that way you can see the updates. Thank you for watching this episode. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something. I certainly learned something. I will not make that mistake again. I do want to highlight that all the basting techniques that I did were fine. The process was fine. The only issue I had was the positioning of the top. So everything I showed you is still what I'm going to do again when I redo the whole quilt. So thanks again. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, check out our Instagram. And I have a lot of seam ripping to do, so I'm going to get back to it. I'll see you on the next one.